today's point is Season 4 meta, Season 4 flavor of the month, powerful specs to play in the upcoming season. As you might know or might not know, patch 10.2.6 is currently a super secret patch that we will not know anything about until the day we log in, but once that day comes, which should be at this point in about 10 or so days, a couple of weeks, once that day comes, the Season 4 patch will go onto the PTR. So we will start to see the planned changes for the fated raids, the fated Mythic Plus season, and the dungeons chosen for the pool of Mythic Plus, as well as the possible balance tuning changes, together with the different choices made by the community when it comes to choosing the tier set you will use in Season 4. This is one of the major changes that might shake up the balance, the power of the specs by changing the tier set. What I think it's curious is to check essentially how specs are doing now, whether it is their presence in the meta in Mythic Plus, together with their current performance right now in Mythic Plus, the tier lists of performance in Mythic Plus or in the raid, as well as checking their current performance in the raid as well. What is curious is that, of course, you have some specs in here that are currently doing great, and they will keep their Season 3 tier set they are using right now in Season 4. Meanwhile, there are other specs doing terribly with this current Season 3 tier set, and they are still keeping this tier set in the next season. For example, Subtlety is keeping their tier set in Season 4, Retribution Paladin is keeping their tier set, and Enhancement Shaman is keeping its tier set. You can ask the same about the bottom half of the specs in the raid or in Mythic Plus. It's the same. You have specs like Beast Mastery Hunter or Marksmanship Hunter or Assassination and Affliction, all keeping their tier set for the next season. However, you also have Survival changing their tier set in Season 4. They will go for the Season 1 tier set, or Devastation going back to Season 2's tier set. From a Mythic Plus perspective, you also have specs like Fire changing their tier set, Shadow changing their tier set, Balance and Destro all changing their tier set, whereas Outlaw, Ret, Havoc, Demo are all going to be keeping their tier set in the next season. That is what is going to be the more interesting part of Season 4, trying to see the effects of the choices of the community and also trying to guess essentially what are you going to be playing in the next season based on these changes, right? Because right now we are past 3 months into Season 3, players have gotten a bit bored, players have started to, raid log, get in once a week, lose a little bit of the of the grind you were having in the first weeks, first couple of months even of the tier, right? And soon enough, in a few weeks, maybe even already to some of you, you have started to get more into trying to figure out what are you going to be playing in Season 4, if you want to reroll, if you want to respec, you want to change from tank to healer, from healer to DPS, from range to melee. And of course, whenever you do that, the question is going to be, okay, who's going to be OP? Who's going to be flavor of the month? Who's going to be viable meta? Who's going to be not declined from the looking for group tool from a plus 15 because it's not part of the meta comp? And this is where we will find the biggest possible differences, the choices players made, because, reminder, the players chose which tier set each spec was going to use in Season 4, the choices players made for the next season. Now, some of the results will be quite interesting in guessing whether or not it will be enough to bring back the spec to the power they had in the past. For example, guess which tier sets Holy Paladins, Guardian Druids, Shadow Priests and Fire Mages chose to have in Season 4. Obviously, they chose the tier set of when they were playing in the Exodia comp in Mythic Plus, so the Season 2 tier set, hoping to go back possibly to those times of feast. Now, what can become a problem when you do things like those is not realizing that also since then balance tuning happened and some things changed which made the power of this tier set not nearly as powerful, months and months later. So even if you go back to this tier set as a Guardian Druid, it's unlikely you will go back to these days. You could say the same about Holy Paladin, who got a bunch of reworks since those days of Exodia and went back to the Season 2 version, which is even more of a problem now that you are swimming in Holy Power to the point where these would overcap your Holy Power even more. On top of that, nowadays you're even more of a ranged healer and not even spending nearly as much time maximizing your Holy Shock usage, which is what this tier set would focus on. So that's the more interesting part, seeing what will happen in Season 4 as you try to tinker with what you would want to be playing in the next season, based also particularly on the choices of the tier sets that will come in Season 4. Roughly 60% of the specs have chosen to remain with the current tier. So, not much should change for them. Let's just say that if a spec is doing overwhelmingly well right now and they are not changing a tier set, it is a more safe bet. Okay, so if you want to have the safest bet right now amongst all of the DPS, that would have to be Red Paladin. Red Paladin right now is amongst the better performers in the raid, while simultaneously being the most popular melee DPS and range DPS and just DPS spec in general in Mythic Plus. So the fact that they are doing this well right now and they will be keeping their tier set in Season 4 makes them the prime target for an easy flavor of the month reroll in Season 4. The second option, although it's a little bit more wide, is Rogue as a whole. Because Rogue as a whole is not changing their tier set, and you have Subtlety for the raid and Outlaw for Mythic Plus. So you have dual spec options without having to change your tier sets in the next season. If you are primarily a raid player, even though likely Fated Season, if you have to go by what happened in Shadowlands, isn't really going to be that difficult when it comes to raiding, the safest pick will be Demo, who is not changing their choice and is doing quite well right now. Then when it comes to tanks and when it comes to healers, in the raid, when it comes to tanks, it mostly doesn't matter. When it comes to Mythic Plus, then the safest option is of course Vengeance. Vengeance is keeping their tier set and this is their level of popularity right now. So of course, easy choice for tanking in the next season. Same goes when it comes to healers, Mistweaver. Mistweaver right now has more or less the highest HPS when it comes to the raid in Mythic, and when it comes to Mythic Plus, they are also the meta healer, and they are not changing their tier set. So it's a pretty easy and smooth choice. Similarly, Discipline. Discipline is also, the second to third tied, still very popular Mythic Plus choice, and it's not changing the tier set, and same goes for the raid, still doing basically the second highest HPS in the raid. However, that's where the fun begins, because these are the easy picks. These are the I don't want to risk too much picks. Just go for what's popular now and is not changing tier. So Red Paladin, Demo, Subtlety, Outlaw, Mistweaver, Vengeance, Discipline, those are the easy choices. Then you can be a gambler. You can go for a flip. You can go for a 50-50. For example, what about something like Fire? Fire is not the best pick in the raid, and Fire right now was, for a bit, doing super well. It's still doing great in Mythic Plus, but they are changing their tier set. Fire is abandoning the Season 3 tier set to go back to the Season 2 tier set, the one focused around Phoenix Flames. Now, even though this shouldn't change too much how you play as a fire mage, the Season 3 buff is still a mega buff centered around combustion most of the time, and Season 2 should just be more or less the same, keeping Phoenix Flames in your combustion rotation, but still, it is change. It is diversity. It is something that could go wrong as a fire mage. Same could be said if you are raid focused, something like Arms and something like Fury are going to be changing their tier set. So that could also be going wrong for these two specs in the raid, going back to the Season 2 tier set for Fury and the Season 1 tier set for Arms. That's, however, gambling in the positive. That's gambling, with a stacked coin in your favor because you are picking a spec that's already doing well. You're picking fire to change to an old tier set even though fire is already meta, so it likely should continue to do well even with a different tier set. How about though you bet in reverse? How about you bet on the specs at the bottom that are going to be changing their tier set? For example, Devastation Evoker. Devastation Evoker, which had a pretty strong end of Season 1 into beginning of Season 2 before they got run over by the Exodia meta, and even in the raid they were doing quite well. They are going back to their Season 2 tier set. Essentially a constantly running in the background dot available to you rather than making you even more dependent on your cooldown. So you are less cooldown dependent spec now, again, in Season 4 with the Season 2 tier set. This could be, you know, it could be a good bet. You could be going back to be much more relevant and viable. Obviously, in the case of Devastation, things are a bit more tricky to figure out because of the existence of this abomination. So this could be what makes the power of Devastation a bit harder to shine through, more so than just changing a tier set. But even without Devastation, you can still look at picks like Beast Mastery, for example, picks like Survival, for example, picks like Balance. Also, if we have to go by the popularity of the specs, Balance, despite being shit, as usual, they are still very, very popular. And they will be changing their tier set in Season 4, going back to the Season 1 version of their tier set. That is what is currently up for grabs when it comes to trying to pick a spec, trying to shake things up, change for Season 4, trying to play something you haven't played before, something that I am also currently looking into it myself. For example, playing Priest in Season 4, playing Discipline will be kinda hard because of the presence in the meta of Shadow. Generally speaking, when Shadow is popular, the healer is not gonna be a Priest, so you start looking at different options, different picks, and trying to see who is, you know, keeping their tier set, who is changing their tier set in the next season. Could and likely for some of them will have an impact in their performance, in their results in Season 4. So this is what we are taking a look at right now before we even see any more info about Season 4. As mentioned, it is likely, even though it might not be nearly as big, it is likely we will get some balance tuning for Season 4. So maybe most of this will be completely irrelevant because even with the changes to the tier set, we will also get a whole bunch of changes to the specs to adjust them, update them to a current version, because for example there are quite a few of these specs back when their tier set was very powerful that have now become much weaker with that tier set because of the changes. For example, Preservation Evoker tier set in Season 1 was very powerful, but ever since the nerf and the changes to that tier set, it would not be nearly as good now compared to back then. So there might also be some significant levels of tuning that might change also the power level of the specs, but still the choice of the tier set is something that will play a pretty important role in their power level coming up in Season 4. At this point, what awaits us is simply waiting for the drop of patch 10.2.6, which should be early March, first week or so of March, we can say, so in about 10 days, a couple of weeks, and then after that we get Season 4 on the PTR, where we get to start to see and test the changes and the additions to the season from Blizzard. For today, on this Sunday, this is all we have to go by when it comes to the theory crafting about the upcoming season. For today, we are now leaving each other as usual by thanking all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel, which can, as usual, still be given completely for free. You can like and comment down below, as well as subscribe to the channel itself. Now, with these pointless things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I like it when it's cold. However, I like it when it's cold because there is no sun reflecting on my monitors. Except now there is the sun, which is not good.